I'm real happy to be here with you all today to talk about John Bernard Adolphus Dahlgren. And Dahlgren, of course, was born in Philadelphia. His father, Bernard Ulrich Dahlgren, was a very successful Swedish merchant and also a Swedish consul in Philadelphia. Um, he will eventually join the U.S. Navy in he's born in 1809, on November 13th, 1809. He joins the U.S. Navy in 1826 as a midshipman. However, all of a sudden, while he's midshipman, he shows this great mathematical brain that he has. And as a result of that, he's going to be assigned to the Coastal Survey in 1834. So he becomes promoted to lieutenant, and he is charting American harbors and so forth. However, he shows this brilliance as a scientific officer, but he is placed to create the U.S. Naval Department of Ordnance, which is really, they did not have one beforehand. Actually, American artillery, prior to Dahlgren becoming chief of naval ordnance, was kind of in disarray. If you look at some of the ships during the War of 1812, they had mixed armament. So in other words, they had to have different powder charges, different size of projectiles, and so forth to really make the ship work. And that means you're not as ineffective of a ship. So Dahlgren will be assigned to the Washington Navy Yard in 1847, where he will establish the Naval Ordnance Department. As an ordnance expert, he will publish 3 books. One is The System of Boat Armaments in the United States Navy, Insomnia read. Shells and Shell Guns, one of my favorite books, and Naval Percussion Locks and Primers. So he's into what he does. And I have to tell you, all those books result in him creating certain aids to the development of naval ordnance. And here he is as a rear admiral and near the end of the Civil War. So he gains his first critical invention was the boat howitzer. And the boat howitzer played a big role during the Mexican War. You know, the U.S. Navy really ran most of the excursions up various rivers on the Mexican coast, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but also in California. They needed firepower to go with them, and they did not have a breakdown style howitzer that could be effectively used on a launch, as well as when they hit the shore, they could put it into an iron carriage, which was invented by John Dahlgren. You can see it right here. Really, it's a pretty brilliant design, and basically, in this gun, you see a knob instead of a castable. So that meant that knob could fit into the land carriage as well as the launch carriage. So in other words, they were able to do a complete mission. And the Blue Jackets did all sorts of activities, Los Angeles, San Diego, during the Veracruz siege and other really important, Tuxpan and so forth, where this smoothbore weapon that he develops answers the need that all the naval officers are crying for. And this smoothbore could fire shot, shell, and shrapnel and canister. It had a brass tube, and the bottom of the barrel had this elevating screw that ran through the castable, as you can see. And it had a crew of 10 in a launch, a crew of 11 on shore. And so this is brass tube, iron carriage that was all easy to put together, like a snap-on tool, so to speak. And So his actually most positive designs are going to be the 12-pounder boat howitzer and the 24-pounder boat howitzer. The Army liked them so much that they would use them as well in place of a mountain howitzer. Dahlgren, once he designs this gun, he decides that there is a problem in the world of shell guns, that shell guns were imperfect in the late 1840s. And there's several reasons why he could point to that. Number one is the 29 February 1844 peacemaker explosion on board the USS Princeton, where, of course, the Princeton was a model ship, the first screw frigate the U.S. Navy had put into service. It is trying to follow some of the Pax and Hans principles of not mixed armament, but the same armaments. However, you had to have, to support your broadside guns, you had to have a you had to have pivot guns, and those pivot guns played a big role. So basically, John Erickson develops a 12-inch pivot gun called the Orator, and his sponsor, who brought him to America, a man known as Flag Officer Robert Stockton, is going to basically get Erickson to design the ship, the engines, as well as the Pax and Hand 32-pounder style gun or 8-inch gun. But you have to have these pivot guns to maximize your firepower. Erickson does the 12-inch. However, Stockton said, I can make a better gun. And he devises a 13-inch shell gun. And Erickson says, that gun is going to blow up, and because he understood the mathematical stresses. And so basically, and Stockton says, well, my gun's bigger than yours, so, go away. In fact, he left Erickson at the dock when the Princeton sailed down to the Washington Navy Yard, and where they had a great party with senators and, everybody who meant something in politics during the 1840s. John Tyler's on board. Actually, that's where he secures the love of his second wife, Julia Gardner Tyler, and there's this big explosion on board, and people like the Secretary of Navy, Secretary of State, head of naval construction will actually, and this is general. He's a brigadier general. Eventually, he's a colonel when he writes certain books in 1926 and 1927 that talks about mixed armament in the on ships. However, the French never really integrate their navy in that fashion. So Dahlgren was determined to design a new generation of shell guns that would be capable of firing explosive shells at high velocity, and they would also have the capacity to fire shot and shell, which means I can handle any type of warship that I have to sink or try to sink. And that includes that solid shot is what makes these Dahlgrens so successful against Confederate ironclads. Now, he doesn't have the vision of ironclads in his mind, but nevertheless, his design philosophy really came from not so much the peacemaker affair, but more so in March of 1849, there's an explosion where they're testing one of his new guns, and he can't believe it burst. And so he says, well, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to solve these problems. Now, Dahlgren believed a safer, more powerful naval cannon could be designed using more scientific design criteria. In other words, he wanted to build a smooth-bore, curve-shaped gun that equalized strain and concentrating more weight of metal in the gun breech where the greatest pressure of expanding propellant gases needed to be met to keep the gun from bursting. That's the worst thing to have happen, is your gun to burst during battle. And there's the peacemaker. Actually, Julia Gardner's father will be killed in this. She's down with John Tyler in the captain's cabin on a special tour. And so basically, her father's going to die. She falls into the arms. She faints of John Tyler. She wakes up. He reminded of her father, and so she wants to marry him. So, I don't know what that tells us. But nevertheless, so it's how do we control these propellant gases? And, because of the rounded contours, Dahlgren guns are going to be nicknamed as soda bottle guns. Wow. There's the standard at the beginning of the Civil War, the 9-inch Dahlgren. And this becomes the most identifiable characteristic of these guns. Now, previously, smoothbore broadside guns firing solid iron shot, short distances. That's we have our broadside combat. And so Dahlgren recognized that the power of an explosive shell means that we can have farther distance between ships, which we can throw the shell at greater accuracy. And as he later wrote in 1852, Paxton Hans has so far satisfied naval men of power of shell guns as to obtain their admission on shipboard. But by unduly developing the explosive element, he had sacrificed accuracy and range. The difference between the system of Paxton Hans and my own was simply that Paxton Hans guns were strictly shell guns and were not designed for shot, nor for greater penetration or accuracy at long ranges. They were therefore auxiliary or associates of the shotgun. This made a mixed armament, which was objectionable in modern navies by this time. And so he said, my idea is to have a gun that should generally throw shells far and accurately with the capacity to fire solid shot when needed. Also to compose the entire battery of such guns. Basically, Dahlgren's shell guns, you passed right by this gun. It's a 9-inch gun from the CSS Virginia. So they were basically iron Columbiads, which had been developed by Thomas Bomford back in the later part of 1816 through 1819. And so they had their distinctive bottle shape, and no shell gun designed by Dahlgren burst in action. And that's unlike Parrott guns and Rodman guns and all these other designs. So Dahlgren had used mathematical formulas to understand how his guns could fire shot, shell, canister, shrapnel, and grape shot, believe it or not. The only gun that could not fire grape shot developed by Dahlgren was the 15-inch gun. But that 15-inch gun, as we'll learn, had a really different purpose. So by 1854, the class known as the Merrimack class of steam screw frigates are all going to have a standardized armament of 9-inch Dahlgrens. And so the Merrimack, as it would have been known, spelled with a K at the end, is going to be is going to have 42 9-inch shell guns. That's ease in loading, ease in supply. All these things are simplified by Dahlgren. Then he wanted to have a shell gun on board. So what does Dahlgren do? He invents the 10-inch shell gun, and then he tries to invent a 13-inch shell gun. Well, the trouble with the 13-inch shell gun is that he cannot get the metallurgy to work in the cast iron method. In other words, when we're casting a Dahlgren, we actually cast it and then we bore out its bore, right, so to 9-inch. Well, the stresses created by larger shells that could not withstand the propellant. So he made one 13-inch gun. His 9-inch guns are very popular. His 10-inch guns were like pivot mounted on the Cumberland. They would have a crew of 20. And oh my gosh, there's 11-inch Dahlgren from the Monitor. And 11-inch became the real standard. Actually, they will build 465 11-inch guns for the U.S. Navy. And a wide variety of foundries, West Point Foundry, Alger Foundry, Fort Pitt Foundry. And on the Monitor, this is a gun from the Monitor, they had a crew of 7 for each gun, plus a gun captain, plus someone to operate the gun turret. So 16 men had to be fitted in the turret with these guns. Kind of amazing. Now, he then recognizes that he's got to have a more powerful gun because he understands how the Confederates are making their casemates sloped, which gives the advantage to the defense. But you have to have a larger shot to break through those casemates. And so he will develop the 15-inch gun. But you could not cast that solid and drill it out. So he steals from Thomas Jackson Rodman how to make a more powerful gun. And basically, he casts the gun around a pipe. As the casting cooled, a smaller pipe was inserted into the first, and warm water, was pumped through the small pipe. At the same time, hot coals were put around the breech, the outside of the casting, to cool slowly from the inside out. As the outer parts of the casting cooled, they compressed and the already inner parts, making a stronger gun. And when I say a stronger gun, these bad boys, or the 15-inch gun, this is called the Passaic or short version of these guns. Now, the cannonball right there you see is a solid shot, 440 pounds. So you can imagine that hurled towards a Confederate ironclad. Now, why were they short? Because the gun couldn't fit through the gun ports of the design of the Passaic class. So what's the problem with that? Well, I got to tell you that there are all these propellant gases that have to go somewhere, and they usually go out the barrel behind the shot. And so those gases are obnoxious and can kill people, so you can't have them go back into the turret. And so Dahlgren creates a smoke box which dissipates the gases and evicts them from coming within the turret. So this is really pretty neat that Dahlgren came up with this. However, he will have a long version that goes with the Conicus class monitors, and which are superior to this. They don't cause the smoke box or anything. Dahlgren's on the top of his game. Let me tell you, when the Civil War breaks out, he is a commander in the U.S. Navy. He is going to be given the job of Commandant of the Washington Navy Yard to replace Franklin Buchanan, and we know his story. So Dahlgren is a commander, and no one wants to promote him to captain to solve the problem, because you can't have to be a captain, able to be named a flag officer to be in command of a naval yard. And so Lincoln loves Dahlgren, thinks he's brilliant, and so he's going to make sure that Congress passes an ordinance to allow Dahlgren to take that position. It would have been easier for them to promote him to captain, which they eventually do. And so basically Dahlgren will, in July 1862, be named Chief of Ordnance and also promoted to Captain. So this is really pretty great. Dahlgren is now, right, one of the most influential people in the U.S. Navy. His gun designs are going to really change naval warfare in the context of the Civil War. You know, he actually had nothing but brilliance around him. You know, one of his brothers actually uh, was a spy for the Confederate purchase agents in England. Another brother, Charles Bunker Dahlgren, was actually a slave owner and a banker in Charleston and a developer of land. So when the Civil War broke out, Charles Bunker Dahlgren, now remember his brother is a big shot in the Navy, well, he joins the Confederate Army. He is so wealthy that he pays for the equipment, including guns and what have you, uniforms of an entire brigade, the 3rd Brigade in the Army of the Mississippi. Now, Jefferson Davis doesn't like him, you know, he's a Northerner masquerading as a Southerner, so Davis thinks. And so he has him rejected from the Confederate Army when state units are merging into the Confederate Army itself. So Dahlgren loses a lot of money. He has to go to New York and be a lawyer after the war, where he regains his money. So now, that is his brother. Now, I got to tell you that one of his sons is very famous, Charles Bunker Dahlgren, who actually learned steam engineering from whom? His father, you know. And so he actually has a very successful Civil War. He will be in command of this 9-inch Dahlgren battery that's designed to shoot down the Confederate batteries near the end of the siege, where he, you know, breaks up these important batteries, which is one of the reasons why Vicksburg is going to fall. Now, his other son, Colonel Ulrich Dahlgren, oh my gosh, he was trained in civil engineering by his father. He works for his uncle in South Carolina, developing tracts of land, and but he's loyal to the Union, and so he will join the U.S. Army. He eventually becomes aide-de-camp to Franz Sigel, and then he becomes aide-de-camp to Joseph Hooker. He fights in the Second Bull Run, Battle of Fredericksburg. Actually, he has a cavalry detachment of 30 men that actually capture and hold the town of Fredericksburg for 3 hours until chased off by the Confederates. You know, he's brave as brave can be. In fact, his bravery is going to result in his wounding on 6 July 1863 during the Gettysburg campaign. He's wounded in a skirmish at Hagerstown. He's shot below the knee, actually in the ankle, which gets infected. His leg is amputated below the knee. He doesn't care. He has, you know, a special leg designed for him so that he can still be in the Army as a cavalry officer. Now, Dahlgren is going to make a big mistake. He hooks up with Judson Kilpatrick, who's a very dangerous commander of U.S. cavalry. Kill cavalry is what they call it. And so they have a plan to raid Richmond, whereas Ulrich Dahlgren's purpose is to free the Union POWs on Belle Isle and then give them combustibles so they can burn the town of Richmond down. Meanwhile, in all that confusion, Dahlgren was going to do what? He was going to capture Jefferson Davis and the cabinet and assassinate them all. He even writes that down in his little notebook. This is what I'm going to do today on March 3rd, 1864. But guess what? He is in the confusion, darkness, bad roads, and so forth, and he will be set upon by the Home Guard, 9th Virginia, and they actually will shoot him 4 times, and he dies on the battlefield. They don't know who he is at first. Then they recognize, wow, that's a fancy leg, and then they read his notebook, and that notebook has been discussed ever since, because John Dahlgren, Dad, says my son would never be involved in something so unscrupulous as that. And yet they matched up signatures, and it actually was his handwriting. They studied that not too long ago, I think on the Smithsonian Channel. So the bottom line is that he's killed. They take his leg to Richmond, parade it around. It's really embarrassing. But nevertheless, Ulrich Dahlgren was involved in this campaign that fails. Well, let's get back to our hero. And he is, of course, all these officers in the U.S. Navy had these huge egos. I can't tell you what it was like to serve under some of them. Like, I'll give a lecture about David Dixon Porter someday soon, and wow, so anyway, we're talking about Dahlgren. John Dahlgren, he's on top of his game. Let me tell you, when news of the sinking of the Congress in Cumberland arrives in Washington, the next morning, who does Abraham Lincoln go and see? John Dahlgren, to get his advice. John Dahlgren said, well, here we have this little ship that I think can make a difference, even though it has 2 guns versus 10. And Lincoln feels much better about this contest that's going to unfold, 200 miles away in Hampton Roads. So Dahlgren is a friend of Lincoln, a confidant of Lincoln. And of course, if you invent the gun everyone's using during the Civil War, you're head of ordnance, Department of Ordnance, you're commandant of the Washington Navy Yard. What can you do next? Well, the next thing you can do is get an appointment to Rear Admiral and then have an active field or ship command. Now, Dahlgren had not been at sea since 1847. And so all of a sudden, he wants to replace DuPont. Now, Samuel Francis DuPont messes up during the April 7, 1863 attack on Charleston. So Dahlgren gives this vote of confidence for the monitors. They were just deployed incorrectly. And so Gustavus Vassa Fox, Gideon Wells, Abraham Lincoln go, wow, he's our guy. Because the U.S. Navy had made a huge mistake in investing in monitors. They invested in monitors because they could carry these 15-inch monster guns that, as we see from the Battle of Wassaw Sound, Battle of Mobile Bay, they could break the casemate of a Confederate ironclad. So he lobbies to be named commander of the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron. Now, there's one of those 15-inch guns. There's a 9-inch gun. You see, the Hartford class of steam screw frigates, the Merrimack class of the Hartford class of steam screw sloops, and the Merrimack class of steam screw frigates were all mounted in broadside. What? That's the 9-inch Dahlgren right there. And that's the Tennessee next to it. Now, the Hartford did not have 15-inch guns on board, but some of the monitors also involved in this battle did. But you can see how the power of that gun is just amazing. So anyway, he takes command of the South Atlantic Blockading Squadron, and he's got to do something to make up for DuPont's mistakes. DuPont never believed in monitors, rightly so. Its design was bad, nevertheless. We're going to see. Now, I got to tell you, even before, I forgot to talk about this gun. This is the 50-pounder rifled gun that's created by Dahlgren. And if you notice, it has that bottle shape, and the gases are controlled by a brass strap that you can see coming down to the castable and the screw coming into it. And so that was to keep it. It's just like, Parrott would ban rifles. Brooke would ban rifles. In fact, Brooke would have triple-banded rifles because that propellant gas is so powerful. So Dahlgren thinks, oh, well, he's on the USS Pawnee, and it's when he is a rear admiral. Now, he wants to kind of, well, there are a couple of things that Dahlgren wants to do while in Charleston. Number one, he wants to capture Fort Sumter. Why? Because DuPont had failed to do so. So I'm going to prove my abilities. And also, he wants to capture Fort Sumter before the Army destroys it and captures it, because there's this huge rivalry between the Army and Navy. I mean, you can read it in dispatches by everyone. And so Dahlgren says, well, we're going to take the fort by boarding. Now, this is something they stopped doing generally by this time in warfare. And basically, he organizes 400 sailors, or bluejackets as we call them, in 25 launches, all with a Dahlgren boat howitzer, right? Yay. And they're commanded by Commander Thomas Holdrup Stevens, Jr., who used to be what? Commander of the Monitor, until he's replaced due to his drinking. So, he's given a very important job. Anyway, so Dahlgren, when they want to come behind the land or the harbor face of Fort Sumter. Now, Fort Sumter by September was really rebel. The Army had really broken it down. However, the Confederates have over 500 enslaved people constantly repairing the fort so that it could still maintain guns. And P.G.T. Beauregard will take the artillerists off it because, they can't really do that anymore. And he puts infantrymen on the fort. And everyone knows this attack's going to happen. The news leaks out that Gilmore is going to make the attack, but really it's Dahlgren who's going to organize it. When I say he wants to take it by boarding, what they do is they come on harbor side of the fort near the gorge wall and they land. The trouble is they land at the wrong spot. I don't know if Stevens was drinking that morning, but we can assume he was. So they miss the landing spot. They're trapped on the walls of Fort Sumter, and Dahlgren orders them to retreat, but most of them are going to be captured. So Dahlgren's plan to capture Fort Sumter fails. And what does he do the rest of the Civil War? Well, he's going to support William Tecumseh Sherman's attack on Savannah, and plays a critical role in forcing the Confederate ironclads to be scuttled. He also will maintain the Charleston blockade in a way that no ship could really make it through. And so he is a technical success. However, he's not an improvement over DuPont. He's a different type of officer than DuPont. He's more of what we call a scientific officer, ordnance expert. And so, not that he wasn't due command, it's just that he connived to get the command at the expense of a brother officer. So, anyway, after the Civil War, he's going to be named as commander of the South Pacific Squadron, taking the place of George Pearson. Actually, John Worden sails the flagship to the Southern California, which was the Pensacola, which is a problem ship. I've already talked about that. And gives it to Pearson. Pearson then gives it to Dahlgren. Dahlgren stays in command for 2 years. He starts to develop heart disease. He is given a land assignment back at the Washington Navy Yard, and there he will die of heart disease. and in 1870. What is Dahlgren's impact? Oh, whoa, whoa. What is Dahlgren's impact on the Civil War? He developed the ordnance that made the U.S. Navy click. Number one, the 9-inch Dahlgren is a very multifaceted gun. Remember, it can be like a shotgun in so many ways, firing solid shot, grape shot, canister, you name it, it could fire it. And at a decent range, 1,700 yards, with good velocity, so that this would really have an impact. But when I talk about velocity, you have to realize when Worden is on board the Montauk, a Passaic class monitor at Fort McAllister, he is going to destroy the CSS Nashville, then known as the Rattlesnake, but he can watch the 440-pound shells fly through the air. So he can properly range his guns. So when I talk about improved velocity, you can imagine that it was an improvement. Whoa, I didn't do that, did I? But anyway, so that's my story about John Dahlgren.